State.
Recall petition.
Recall, thank you. Thank you so much, Ralph Pointer. But his real crime was fighting the Maytag Corporation. His real crime was fighting against the emergency manager system in the state of Michigan, which disenfranchises mostly Black communities throughout that state, not just in Detroit. But he's out on parole. He never should have been incarcerated in the first place. But that is, Americans don't like to think that there are political prisoners here, but he certainly was one. But as of a few days ago, no longer. Yesterday, we got bad news, the worst news. The police officer who murdered Philando Castile in Minnesota was acquitted. And these things are always so hard. I always say I shouldn't be surprised, and yet I am angered and saddened. It's like a kick in the stomach to have heard this actually not surprising information about police murder, one that we saw on video. But it never seems to matter if there's video, if there's photographs, if there are witnesses. It never seems to count. But if you listen to what we're told, the indoctrination that we receive in this country, you would think that these things never happened. We're told all the time that America is a great country, a good country. Former President Obama, one of the things that annoyed him about me so much, there were so many things, but he always referred to America as being exceptional and indispensable.
It's not.
And that means that anyone who says that thinks that America is superior, and of course that the rest of the world is dispensable. And it's hard to convey the depth and the extent of those lies, but I'm going to try. We live in a country that's one of the worst violators of human rights on the planet. Violates the rights of its own citizens, the people of other nations, and the rights of other governments too. And one of the reasons that Obama and others say these things is that our government seeks to diminish everyone's rights, and to say that no one has a right even to exist. But this history goes back a long way. You know, it's interesting being here in Virginia, and aside from being in Washington, D.C. and going nearby, I've never been in the state before, but this state is the epicenter of the American colonial project. It wasn't really Plymouth Rock, it was Virginia. This is the state where the first enslaved Africans came to Jamestown. And we hear King James and about Pocahontas. It's very interesting how these things are still latched onto with such ferocity. And it's not possible to be in a place like this and not make the linkage with what we're living with today. The settler colonial project, the two terrible genocides of the indigenous population and of enslaved Africans, we're living with the legacy of those acts today. Everyone knows, or should know, that the United States has the biggest prison population of any other country in the world. The largest number of incarcerated people, more than 2 million, and the largest percentage of its population behind bars. And a lot of those people are kept legally as unpaid laborers, as slave laborers. Yeah. If you call a call center, and if the person on the other end is not in India, they are probably behind bars in an American prison. And if there were truth in advertising, if products said made in prison, clothing, uniforms, yes, furniture would all tell the tale of the extent of this atrocity. And it's only been in recent years that anyone attempted to find out how many people are killed by the police in this country. And we have to thank, of course, the Malcolm X grassroots movement, because they were the first to take a serious look. And they told us that every 28 hours, a Black person is killed generally by police, but by vigilantes, by private security, all of whom act like a modern-day slave patrol. But we now know that every year more than 1,000 people are killed by police. It's 3 people, okay, it's like 2.8, not quite 3. 3 people every day are killed by the police. And I find it interesting that when we read in the corporate media about human rights violation, they always go thousands of miles away to some other part of the world. And when the grossest human rights violation is taking place right here in this country. And it's based on the legacy that I talked about. There was a story in the New York Times a few days ago, I don't know if you saw it, about the opioid epidemic, which affects white people more, I think. But anyway, this article was about police helping addicts, and it's something about friends in blue or something like that. Amazing. And addicts find a friend in blue. And we'll remember back in the 80s and the 90s when the crack cocaine epidemic began, this was an excuse to lock black people up. Some of whom are still locked up. And I never talk about this issue without mentioning the fact that Barack Obama, his Justice Department, opposed giving those people who were sentenced under those terrible draconian laws, opposed giving them the ability to request resentencing. Not to let them out, just to ask to be let out. But Obama and Eric Holder said that should not happen. So, 1 minute, oh my God, I was talking. But anyway, we're here to talk about the wars at home and abroad. And the wars abroad are quite obvious. The United States has made a mockery of all its claims about human rights around the world. Libya was destroyed. There's an ongoing human rights crisis. African immigrants and dark-skinned Libyans are literally being sold into slavery. And that is because of Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. There would not be millions of Syrian refugees if it were not for them. I find it amazing that the press can talk about the Syrian refugee crisis and not talk about the fact that it was the United States making this decision to try to destroy this country, to have its proxies, Saudi Arabia and Turkey and others, send terrorists into this country and destroy it and create a terrible human rights crisis. So I'm going to close by saying, remember, when you see something about Russia, Russian police don't have guns. And the protests that are being ginned up by people in this country here and people are arrested, nobody gets shot. Just keep that in mind. So I thank you.